Show your T-BAL team spirit and buy your hard-working Art Lab team a cup of coffee, which helps fuel purchases of high-octane equipment and T-BAL tech that get poured back into percolating, highly caffeinated content for you. Just go to buymeacoffee.com and search Therapy Bites.
On this episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Hey T-Ballers, welcome to another episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab, and you're going to be thrilled today to have some of your misperceptions about welfare and poverty challenged. I invite you to open your eyes, open your ears, because we're talking about life at the fair, psychology of poverty. Pamela M. Covington inspires listeners with authentic, thought-provoking stories and personal, she's been through this stuff, personal, practical tips for overcoming adversity. She speaks from her own lived experience. She once plummeted from a lifestyle of the middle-class comfort into one of shocking, deep poverty, but she persistently struggled until she was able to lift herself and her children out of it. Today, Pamela is so zealous about encouraging others to move beyond their challenges, and as a woman's transition coach, she currently is developing a program to help women build up the resilience needed, one of our favorite terms in the Art Lab, resilience needed to overcome adversity, often resulting from unplanned, unpleasant, major life challenges. Join us on this episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Stay tuned following the interview for On the Couch and Off the Rocker, our special guest's psycho-silly analysis by Art Lab's own head cabbager, Dr. Ima Freudnot.
Welcome to Therapy Bites Art Lab, where Dr. Heath and his special guests share real-life stories of helping and healing, fresh from the actual therapy couch, while taking a bite out of common counseling missteps and misconceptions. And now, here's Heath and the TBAL team.
Pamela, she is a speaker, women's transition coach, storyteller, author of A Day at the Fair, One Woman's Welfare Passage. She is an anti-poverty advocate and education proponent, and today we're going to talk about the mechanics of poverty and welfare, some common myths about welfare, it's not what you think, and coping with major life change. Thank you so much for being on the episode today, Pamela. We have been excited to have you here. And to get started, we'd like to hear a little bit about your story and how you got into the work that you're doing.
Stay in the stands at the end of the interview, T-Ballers, and witness our special guest slug a bite-sized brain ball with your name all over it, clean out of the Art Lab.
Well, I'm going to go back in some time. And what happened to me, I'm someone who once, as you mentioned, lived a very comfortable middle-class lifestyle. And at that time, I didn't know anything about public assistance. And I pretty much subscribed to what I had seen in the media. Somebody standing up and waving their hands and talking about they're all freeloaders and lazy and don't want to do any good and free. I mean, it was just all negative stuff. Well, eventually what happened to me is for my sake of my and my children's safety, I left that comfort because my domestic partner, my children's dad, suffered with post-traumatic stress disorder. Before we met, he had served in Vietnam. And on his good days, he was everything to me and the boys, absolutely wonderful. In fact, he was the most sensitive, loving man I've ever met. I've never found anyone like him since in my life. But I had to make that choice to leave that comfort just so the children and I could feel safe, because he would go into these unpredictable fits of rage, and I just couldn't see staying there any longer. So that happened in Savannah, Georgia. We lived in a totally renovated Victorian home in the midst of Forsyth Park. If you've ever been to Savannah, it's a place many people visit. It's about 30 acres long and has private gardens. It's just drop dead gorgeous, Spanish moths hanging off the trees. And to put some distance between myself and my spouse, I just loaded up some things in a truck and made a getaway one day while he was at work. And I ended up going 4 hours away to Jacksonville. And for the first week, my children and I were literally staying in hotels, burning up money I didn't really have. We're driving around with a moving truck, towing an old vehicle, and I frittered away most of what we had. It got to the point where we moved from the hotel because the money was running out, and I ended up going and to the social service organization, the Jacksonville Urban League, where every day I would report and work with a housing agent there who was constantly calling around, explaining my situation, how I had fled for me and my children's safety, but now was here in the city with no relatives and really honestly the credit of a teenager and no job. So he had a very hard time finding some place for us. Someone suggested I go to the YWCA, which I did, but I got hurt even more because they looked at my children and pointed to my oldest one and said, "How old is he?" And when I said 9 years old, they said, "I'm sorry, miss, we can't help you. We can't have children of the opposite sex after they're 6 years old."
Oh, my goodness.
So now I'm shivering. I'm shivering now. I'm having this time just driving around. The moving truck, by the way, is costing me 40 cents a mile. Okay. And I don't know where I am. So I just happen to remember that one day I was in a doctor's office and I was speaking with another mother and telling her about the emotional discomfort of what was going on at home. And she told me that if I ever decided to leave, she knew someone in Jacksonville who might help me. I remembered I had that scrap of paper and a notebook in my purse. I pulled it out and I gave her a call and told her we had just got rejected from the Y. She had my children and I come and stay with her. She had a trailer in her backyard and she allowed us to stay there temporarily until we were able to find a place. But it was really just ugly. The hotel I was in initially was very seedy, smelled old, I didn't want to take my shoes off and walk on the carpet. Now, can you imagine that?
Oh, my goodness.
And then when we were kind of sleeping in the van, because my other child was 1.5, so I would make him a little pallet of a bed in between the driver's seat and the passenger seat in which my 9-year-old was sitting, and we would sleep like that. And I would get up in the morning, go to McDonald's, which was something that we did not eat when we lived well. We ate only the healthiest food. We had lots of fresh vegetables, only ate fish, no meat at all, whole grains. I mean, we were really taking care of our health. And now here I am relegated to McDonald's. And then while we're in McDonald's, what I would do before we went to order our meal, I would go in the bathroom and run water in the bathroom sink, put my foot against the door and wash my baby up every day. So while I'm in there, I'm got my foot on the door because I'm afraid somebody's going to say, hey, you've been in there for a long time. You need to come out. I've got to use the restroom. And there's always a funny thing to even the saddest stories. My baby's in there having fun because to him, he's all excited. Wow, we're doing this and we're washing up, And I'm like, and I'm literally doing all I can to keep from crying, not believing that here I am in McDonald's with my foot against the door and leaning to the sink and trying to securely hold my baby while I'm watching him and he's having a good old time with it. So I had the same negative attitude that most people have about public assistance after I only knew what I had seen in the media. And I was totally floored once we finally got a place. It did get us off the streets, but honest, Dr. Heath, that's all it did. It had no heat, no air conditioning. And we're in Florida with our bedrooms on a second floor, living in a tenement that only has a window in the front and a window in the back. There was no refrigerator, no stove. And on a good day, I cooked Vienna sausages and grits on a pot on top of a kerosene heater that I borrowed from someone.
Oh, my goodness. And that's even though you have the government assistance, it's still that level of living.
Well, it took time for me to apply. Initially, first of all, you got to have an address. So while I don't have an address, I can't apply. And then once I did, I was able to get emergency food stamps. But think about it, Dr. Heath. What is the cardinal rule of food stamps? That you can only buy food that you can do what with? Cook.
Oh, really? I was unaware of that.
Yes, you can only buy foods that you can take home and cook. You're not allowed to go out and buy prepared foods. There was already an assumption being made that I have a refrigerator and stove.
Wow.
Well, at that rate, my children and I went without a refrigerator for 3 months, and we went without a stove for 8 months. It was just rough. And I knew when I looked around, I felt guilty because I took my children from this custom renovated Victorian home, and this is what I had reduced them to. And I was just totally heartbroken. I still can well up thinking about how wonderful he was and how I've never found anyone as sensitive and loving and talented. He had so many good things about him that I was actually angry with the government because how dare he be sent to Vietnam? It wasn't America's favorite war by any means. And now he came back a different person.
Yeah.
And so that was one of my arguments sometimes when people wanted to negate me because I was on welfare. Well, the government kind of put me in this situation. Let me tell you how I got here.
That's an excellent point, and I've seen that story repeated over and over and over again. I did my clinical rotations through the VA, and I would have soldiers from Vietnam, and that was at the time almost half a century ago when Vietnam had occurred when I was doing that. And these guys had carried that trauma with them for decades, and it was kind of sign up and be discarded afterward. And as you say, it was the least favorite war, but our soldiers did not pick that war. Our soldiers simply went to find it. The politicians picked the war. The soldiers went to fight it. You know, I'll butcher the quote. I wish I knew it verbatim. But war is all about young men fighting the wars of old men. Politicians don't fight wars. They just pick them. It's our young men that go and die for them and suffer because of them. That should tell us something about how much in need we are of a better breed of politicians. And I've been personally waiting on that better breed of politicians for decades myself. But that's a good point that people look at those who are on welfare and those who are on the streets and those that are homeless. And it's not as if I'm immune to this. I've thought this too. I've struggled with it. What do you do? What do you say? How can you help? Whose fault is it? We live in a culture that the first thing we do when there's a problem is we find fault. If you're on Capitol Hill and you're Democrat, it's got to be the Republicans' fault. If you're Republican, it's got to be the Democrats' fault. And then all the people that need help kind of get caught in the middle. How about let's join hands and adapt a problem-solving mentality? There are actually cultures on the planet, and people will think I'm making this up, that when there's a problem, they don't point fingers, they just address the problem. They just work together, join hands to fix it. And if you're a politician listening to this, let me just say, take responsibility and stop pointing the finger at those across the aisle and start joining hands and fix the freaking problem. I really doubt, Pamela. Tell us, I mean, as someone that's been there, and I'm going to guess that people that are on welfare or homeless really don't care about your politics. They just want the problem fixed.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And those are some of the distorted thoughts that people typically have is you must have done something. It's got to be your fault. If you're in this situation, then you chose to be in this situation, and you did make a choice, but your choice was for the safety of yourself and your children.
Yes. I mean, it had got to the point that I could envision, because I have this graphic mind, that if I stayed there, The children and I could very well become a newspaper headline: "Man kills wife, kid's self." It had gotten that bad. I really hated to leave him. I really did. I mean,
Well,
I cried about that too.
That sounds like a fairy tale existence. I've not been to Savannah, but I've seen pictures, and it looks like such a beautiful area. You were kind of living in a fairy tale, and I can't imagine a tougher decision than to leave that fairy tale for no stove, no refrigerator, food that you had to cook, but how do you cook it because you don't have a way to cook it? No one chooses that on purpose. Your choice was different. Yes. It was for safety.
Yes. Well, one of my first realities, because remember now, while I'm living the cushy lifestyle, I'm buying into all this stuff that people are saying and negative, and I didn't even know anyone on public assistance. How dare I? So when I get an address and I actually go and apply, because the day that I went to get emergency food stamps, they made me aware that if I would fill out an application, that my children and I would have that nutritional assistance on a regular basis. Well, just to give you an idea of how bad the odds were for me, my box of roaches, as I call it, a cement box of roaches, the rent for it was $170 a month. My welfare check for a family of 3 at that time was $152 a month. So you see, each month, even though my spouse did pay his child support, between that and the $152 a month welfare, that was everything I had to exist from. And here I had 2 growing boys that need shoes. I got a baby in diapers. I mean, I had to do whatever was necessary. And what it came down to was myself, my strength in myself, and having to be able to maintain a vision of who and what I really am and what I want for my children. Whatever happened, I did not want that range of poverty to become my 2 male children's definition of normal. So that became my goal. I'm like, okay, I know how I got in this, and I don't know how I'm going to get out of it, but I know I'm going to get out of it as soon as possible. And I did. So one of the things I like to bring to people's attention is, if you've already dealt with everything in your known, that is, you've hashed it over, you've tried everything, you've had all these hypotheses that didn't work out, then it is time for you to face the unknown. And the reason is because if the only things that can happen to us in our life, Dr. Heath, are the things that our tiny little human minds can conceive of, that's not going to be very much. And even so, it's not going to be credible, because we're basing that either on past experience or anxieties about the future. So I always, even now, most recently, I've made a change of just spinning the dice and opening myself up to the unknown, because I've exhausted my known. And now, instead of basing what happens to me on the little limited concepts that my mind holds, I'd rather open myself up to unlimited possibilities.
I think that's amazing.
Carl Jung talked about it, synchronicity, But those things can't take place, mind you, unless you have some basic things. And that housing was one of them. As Maslow's hierarchy clearly illustrates, at the base, the bottom line thing has to be a sense of safety, which comes in the form of shelter, aka housing.
Yeah.
Because without that, I could never have thought to try to bring myself up above to self-actualize any of my skills and talents.
Well, because a little thing there for our listeners that aren't familiar with that is Abraham Maslow. He has a hierarchy, and at the very base of it, as Pamela talks about, is food, clothing, shelter, basic needs. And now, why is that so important? Well, you have an area of your brain called the amygdala, and if you think you're at risk, if you think you're at threat or in danger, then you're continually in survival mode. And let me put a finer edge on it. Imagine that you're being chased by a grizzly bear, and you're running as fast as you can from the grizzly bear. But, oh, wait, here's what we want you to do while you're running from the grizzly bear is we want you to hunt for a job. And we want you to pull yourself up, and we want you to write a book, and we want you to be a valuable citizen that pays taxes. And, oh, forget about the grizzly bear, just keep running and do all this other stuff too. What Pamela's trying to get across to us today, I hope I'm getting this right, and I hope you listeners are listening to this and taking notes, is that it's really difficult, if not impossible, to accomplish all this stuff if you're in a continual state of fight or flight, if you're always running from the grizzly bear. And, you know, what I would expect a government to do, instead of just giving it lip service, is to help people out of that grizzly bear alarm state, so that then they could focus their attention on doing something that, Pamela, I don't know how you did it. I'm looking forward to hearing how you did it, because I think that statistically you're in the decimal point digits of doing such a thing. But in most people, they just don't do it, because every day is fight or flight. Every day is where's my next meal. Every day is where's my shelter coming from? Where am I going to get my clothing? If it's too hot, how do I keep from having heat exhaustion? If it's too cold, how do I keep from dying from exposure? Oh, I have children. I've got to watch out for the same thing with them. But then, oh, by the way, forget about all those grizzly bears chasing you. We want you to pull yourself out of homelessness and out of poverty. How can that ever happen? But what was the I don't know what to call it, the epiphany? How did you go from that to widening your mind to deciding what you're going to think and believe about yourself?
I thought you'd never ask. Well, before we go there, I want to continue to illustrate just how bad this situation was. The definition of poverty is the amount of income provided per number of heads in a household. The children and I, with our $152 a month welfare check and our $170 box of cement and roaches, it was well below any. After we did that, there wasn't anything else that we could do. And so there were some things that I had to do to survive, to get away from the grizzly bears. When you have food stamps, you can only use them to buy food you take home to cook. It doesn't pay for things like detergent, house cleaning stuff, bug spray, or toilet paper. This is a confession, I make it openly, I actually got my toilet paper regularly from McDonald's.
Oh my.
That same bathroom that we used to wash in became a source for me to get toilet tissue, because we got a place now and it does have a commode, but I don't have money left to buy those kind of things.
For full show notes and transcript of today's episode, go to TherapyBites.podbean.com.
The Therapy Bites podcast is HIPAA compliant. No identifying patient information will be disclosed by Therapy Bites podcast hosts or Therapy Bites podcast guests without permission from patients or guardians. All personal stories are de-identified in order to comply with HIPAA, the NASW Code of Ethics, and the ethical principles of psychologists and Code of Conduct. Fresh from the therapy couch and from the deep dark recesses, stories may involve exploding preconceived notions and topics uncomfortable to underthinkers and small farm animals. Audience discretion and duct taping your head for safety is advised. Concrete-headed Kool-Aid drinking humans assume all risks associated with any possibility of choking to death on the accurate, realistic thoughts presented in the art lab. This is natural selection, and Therapy Bites podcast management and hosts are not responsible.
Welcome to this episode of Fresh from the Therapy Couch, where we share stories of hurting, helping, and healing, real-life stories from real-life humans, hoping their message can be a message that you T-ballers can use to improve your own lives and possibly maneuver around the mistakes they've made. Today, we're going a little bit off script because we're taking a post from a public social media platform where people post things asking for help from the universe of folks on social media, and sometimes it's just pretty bad advice. But the response to this mother who is having a problem with her teenage daughter, the post response says, "My mom used to do this stuff to me all the time. It was so exhausting. Your daughter wants to be left alone. It's wrong for you to have emotional outbursts in front of her and try to manipulate her into spending time with you." And the post goes on. It's not really terrible advice. There are some good points. I do think that post moves the conversation along, but with a slight correction. And I'm doing air quotes here. Emotional outburst is a commonly used colloquialism that can likely be blamed on my own profession, but this is a confusion in properly seeing the cognitive processes underlying what is being described. Emotions, folks, are invisible. They simply cannot be seen. What you can see are behaviors, not emotions. You may say, but DocHeath, the crying, yep, that's a behavior. Or the loud voice, yep, that's a behavior. Or the wrinkled face, or the red face, or the stomping, or the tossing the toaster oven. Behavior, 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 behavior. It's time to stop confusing emotions with a behavior, and moreover, to stop demonizing emotions and focus on the thoughts that create both the emotion and the behaviors that proceed from that thought process, or lack of behavior that proceeds from a thought process. By the way, emotions are not only invisible, but neither their presence nor their absence is either healthy or unhealthy. That's like saying your facial hue is unhealthy when it's never that, but the underlying condition with which we should be concerned that is leading to a certain facial hue. In well-done cognitive therapy based on cognitive science, the focus is never the emotion, but the cognition, the underlying thought process. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
You're listening to Therapy Bites Art Lab, bite-sized therapy for your brain with Dr. Heath and the TBAL Team. The best advice on the net. No copay required.
You're slipping beneath the cushions of your bobble-headed psychotherapist's couch, leaving behind empty, echoing, cushy, comforting, pseudo-psychological claptrap, moving into a deeper dimension of your own mind, where distorted thinking, hurting, hopelessness, and regret evaporate into clarity, healing, renewed hope, and newfound resilience. That's the podcast sign up ahead. Your next stop, Therapy Bites Psych-Secrets.
Hey, you T-ballers out there. Come on in close and take a listen to this. This is DocHeath undercover and in disguise with Psych-Secrets. We're talking about porcupines and prickly people. You know, porcupines are famed for their quills, aren't they? But these are actually large, stiff hairs that help defend the animal against natural predators. Now, contrary to popular notions, the large rodents can't throw their quills at an enemy. According to Jeffrey Karp, a bioengineer at Harvard Medical School in Boston, let's apply this to relationship interactions. We often believe that someone who's being a bit prickly is just about us, because of us, directed at us. But let's look a bit more deeply beyond those prickly quills, shall we? Consider this. Since we know that it is cognitions or thoughts that manufacture both emotion and behavior, not other people, when someone's being a bit prickly, it's because they are interpreting something as a threat to them. Unless you are that threat, then it is not at you that those prickly fins are being raised, but because of the own person's prickly thought processes. As a result of a person's own thinking, they enter a protective posturing and all the quills are activated in a protective response. But be careful to understand this also. The response is protective, not projective. Nothing is being thrown at you. Nothing is being hurled back at you, because of you, at you, and certainly not another person's quills of catastrophization. Psychotherapy Duck says, quack, quack, wisen up, don't take it personally. Another person's behavior is because of that person's thinking. Don't be sidetracked by the quills of catastrophization. My, doesn't that sound like a great title to a really, really freaky horror movie? DocHeath and Psychotherapy Duck say enjoy the rest of the episode.
Once again, DocHeath rips the cushions from the couch, dishes the dirt, lets the cat out of the bag, uncorks the bottle, letting the genie escape, and blows the lid off of another of the universe's Psych-Secrets.
Live the art life. Become a TBAL Teammate Inner Circle supporter on Patreon at patreon.com/therapybites.
Here's Heath and the TBAL team.
I can't imagine, because of all the things in the Meeks household, I would say the most important thing is toilet paper. We can skimp on a lot of things. We don't skimp on toilet paper.
Yes. Well, I'll say paper products, period, because as a woman, I needed sanitary supplies. My baby needed diapers, another paper product. And so, like I said, I would save change from my food stamps. Back in those days, there was no thing as an EBT card. The food stamps were actually coupons you tore out of a little booklet. And when you had change coming to you in the grocery store, they actually gave you coinage. So I would purposefully go to the store and spend just this amount of money, spend 50 cents so I could get 50 cents, spend 25 cents so I could get 75 cents. And I had a jar. And I would do this repeatedly until that jar had enough in it for me to be able to go to the laundromat. Because don't forget, I got children who play outside. They're going to school, and I still need to be able to provide for them. In my house in Savannah, I had a laundry room. So that's how bad it all was. And there's just, again, the thing that drove me was there was no way in hell that I was going to let that become my children's definition of normal.
Oh, okay.
So once I finally get a place and we're settled, another mother in that same long complex, she comes to my house on a Christmas morning. And she sees that the only heat the children and I have in that entire place is this little kerosene heater, which, by the way, I cooked on, as I mentioned earlier. But not only that, at night, I tucked it upstairs. It went to bed with us. And then in the morning, when we come down, we'd bring the heat down. And she said, "Is that all you have?" And I'm like, "Yes." And I borrowed that. And it's another mouth to feed, because now my change also has to buy gallons of plastic milk jugs worth of kerosene every day. And she said, "Well, you know what? There's a program called Section 8. And if you get your name on that list, they'll base your rent on your income. And it has housing standards. It has central air conditioning as one of them, central heat. The kitchen will be furnished." And she said, "But if you're going to think about doing that, leaving here and doing that," she said, "you need to go and get on the list, because that list is so long, it's taking about a year and a half for it to be your turn to get a unit."
18 months.
And she hit that nail on the head. Exactly 18 months. My children and I got to Jacksonville in December of 1983. And it was July, a year and a half later, that I got that call to come down and get the key and find out how it all works and everything. And so once we got a place where I called it a launching pad, basically. Once I got a launching pad with conveniences, oh my God, I could go to the wall and flick a thermostat again. I remember thermostats. Then I had to decide, how am I going to get myself out? Am I going to go to work? If I go to work, what will I do for the kids? How will I pay childcare, transportation? Because the old car I brought with me ended up, the transmission had gone on it and was sitting out front with weeds growing around it. And so there was a church that I decided to make my church home. And there was a woman there I met, Dr. Sylvia Tether, rest her soul. And she approached me and the children the Christmas, because they were going to bring things to me so the children would have a Christmas. And she asked me, "Had you ever thought about going back to school?" And I told her, "Well, I thought about it. I had actually started in Savannah, but I needed to leave, and so did the whole thing of me going to college. And she kept on me constantly. And at the time, I wasn't really feeling it, Dr. Heath, because all I'm thinking about is survival and how we're going to eat and when am I ever going to really get a stove. And I mean, and then my youngest son started exhibiting behavioral problems. So on top of everything else now, I'm going to parental counseling. I mean, it's just all a hot mess. And this woman's talking to me about going to college. So I would start avoiding her at church on Sunday if I saw her, Eventually,
sure, you're running from the grizzly bear, but we want you to study for college classes on your way.
In the process.
And for you guys listening, by the way, the behavior problems, a kid's behavior cannot escape their environment. And going back to Maslow's hierarchy, when a kid's brain registers that they may not be safe, the output of that is behavioral problems. And you can blame the kid, you can blame the parent, but I recommend looking at the environment. And I think that's one of the worst things in our welfare system is we don't really understand the impact of that on our children.
Yes, I agree. And so when we finally got into Section 8 apartment, and it was like, yay, but I didn't fall in love with it, Dr. Heath. It was another thing that I was going to overcome, now that I had a launching pad. And it was very helpful because I no longer had to take my $152 welfare check and shell it all out and still come up with $18 to pay just the monthly rent. In fact, I even got a subsidization of a utility. So each month I got a small check, $15 or $20 to help pay utilities. And so the way Section 8 worked, and I had to learn all of this, is you go in paying zero rent, but once you get on your feet or you start getting a job and get income, everything is going to be income based. So initially I was probably paying like maybe $50. And then when I got a better job, it would go up gradually. But the way I got a better job was I finally went over to Dr. Sylvia Tether and told her, I think I'm ready. Because every objection or problem that I thought I would have to stop me from going to school, Dr. Tether had an answer for. I'm like, but I don't have any transportation. She said, well, you can get such and such and such for that. And I'm like, and I need childcare for my 1.5-year-old. Well, he was 3 by then. My 3-year-old. And she's like, oh, they have subsidized childcare as long as you show that you're registered full time in a community college or a university, that they'll take care of all of that. And I mean, I was coming up with, I don't have money for books. And she said, they'll have money for that too. And so she answered everything. And then she had a friend at the college who was a professor. And lo and behold, I ended up taking a major in the community college, which I think should also be tied into our helping people, by the way. I ended up taking broadcast journalism. I was always interested in communications.
Wow, imagine that. Now, just to be sure I understood what you said, are you saying that you think it'd be helpful to integrate into welfare some type of community college support?
Oh, if I could ever be known for one thing, if resources and time and money were unlimited for me, I would put my time into revamping the welfare system, because I come out quite successfongly, as you will find out. But I was like, what if instead of me, people who are on public assistance do like I did, which was just ping-ponging around like flippers on a pinball machine, and then things just happen to line up. What if that was systematized? And I feel I could really do a good job at that, but community college would have to be one of the options in the package.
Well, I think that's a fabulous idea, because I would heavily support what I would call an ISP approach. There's got to be income. People have to survive. There has to be support, and you got that from your doctor friend. And then there has to be possibility, and that's where the community college comes in. People will never rise above the vision that they have. If you can't have a vision of where to go, then how would we expect people to get there? And I think did you say Dr. Sylvia?
Dr. Sylvia Tether was her name. She passed away many years ago.
is what did that for you. She showed you what was possible. And there's so many people. I mean, that's what made the biggest difference in my life. I was a know nothing, do nothing high school kid that just thought the goal of high school was to graduate. And my philosophy was, why would I work really hard at getting a 4.0 when you're going to graduate me at a 2.0? I mean, to me, that extra 2.0 just represents a lot of work for nothing. And no one was there to really tell me, hey, but look, if you'll do this much, here's the payoff. Here's what that will get for you. And eventually, and it wound up being my mother-in-law, God rest her soul, one of the most wonderful women on the planet. My mother-in-law began to well, she wasn't my mother-in-law at the time. She became my mother-in-law later. And I married my high school guidance counselor's daughter, by the way. But she showed me what was possible. And I don't know, do you think that that's a big thing with homelessness and poverty and welfare, is that there's minimal income provided, almost no real support, and then we don't show people what's possible.
Right. Or let's even say they come from a second generation of poverty. They have no history of success in the family to look back on. So that, but then you have homeless people who really don't want to be homed because they don't want to play into the societal game, and everything out there seems bigger than them, and they don't feel they could ever get past that. And they're like salmon swimming upstream. There are some of them who do not wish to be homed.
Well, I think that's a good point, that there's just not one reason for homelessness and poverty, and therefore there's not just one fix or cure for it. And I don't want to be simplistic, because it's not all about just throwing money at people, because it's got to be, it's not a static approach. It has to be more dynamic. It has to be multifaceted. And I think that those are some important facets. I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about that. Now, I don't watch the news. I want to just say to everybody, it's just a mental health thing for me. I don't watch the news. I hear about it. I just don't watch it. But I've actually never heard about someone recommending that one of the cures for poverty and welfare and even homelessness is maybe a community college approach. I think that's fantastic.
Right. And college isn't for everyone, but there are other hand skills. Everybody born has some gift or some talent or skill that they can apply. So I'm going to tell you, once I settled in a Section 8 apartment, and I was feeling fairly comfortable, I was able to start visioning, as you mentioned, that I could go to school. Now that Sylvia's answered all the possible problems I thought I could come up with. And I end up in a broadcast journalism class. And the professor, who Dr. Tether had told me was her friend, he always asked us to call him Ron. I refer to him as Ron. He was a mentor for me. One day, I'll tell you this, I'm going to jump up a little quicker on the story here. One day while I'm in the class, Ron, before class, he's just having us come in, the classroom's door, and people are filling the seats and what have you. He walked over to me and said, "Oh, Pamela, would you come to see me after class? I have something I really needed to discuss with you." Well, things have been going so bad domestically with me and my son's behavior, still stretching money, that I felt, oh boy, that last paper I turned in must have been really bad. Well, quite the contrary. When I got in his office, I was right. It was about the paper. He was holding that paper in his hand, and he said, "Pamela, this is actually pretty good. You've got one or two little weak spots here, but I'm going to be honest with you. You can turn words into dollars."
Wow.
Now, here's somebody telling me that my natural ability to think something and be able to express it is valuable. Before that, I may never have come to that. Because you see, while I was in college, I was a little I'm not an introverted person by any means, but when I was there, I was just kind of going with the flow because, first of all, I didn't want anybody there to know I was on welfare. Second of all, there wasn't a lot of 29, 30-year-old moms going to school. It wasn't like what you see today with older people, not going straight from high school into college. And so I never forgot that. When I got done with my book, I had been trying to find Ron for a while. And I wanted to know, before I published that book, may I keep your name in the book exactly as it is? Because I don't know if you know it or not, but you're my life's story hero.
Wow.
And he said he never had any idea. As I was preparing my manuscript, I was thinking about Ron, and I started trying to find him online. I couldn't find him. And just as I was just about done, he pops up on LinkedIn. And so I asked him, Ron, may I keep your name in the book as it is? I told him, did you know that you are my life's story hero? And he said he had no idea whatsoever. He did not know that I was on welfare. And he commended me because just because I never expected anybody to treat me any different. So fair. And his wife and he both read the book, and they wrote me the most wonderfully supportive letter. So I hung with Ron all the way through to get my associate's degrees. I ended up getting 2. And part of the program required me to do an internship, an unpaid internship. Well, one day I met a magazine called Jacksonville Today, which is a very colorful, glossy, one of these fine publications, that has an affluent readership. And I'm there to learn how the whole publishing thing takes place. Well, one day I'm in the room sitting where the editor is, and I hear she's having a telephone conversation with someone who is asking if they have anyone available that they could send out to cover a story. And she tells them, I'm sorry, but we're on deadline right now, and I don't have anyone to spare. Then she says, oh, well, wait a minute. And she puts the phone down. She comes over to the desk where I'm sitting and says, Pamela, I have a assignment for you. It's for a newspaper that wants you to be a stringer reporter. Well, I was very uncomfortable. Here's where you can't let fear mess you up. I'm like, first of all, in those days, you could count on one hand the number of Black journalists, okay? Second of all, I had no kind of press credentials or anything. I'm on welfare. I got to get beyond this. So I asked her, may I think about that, please? And I went in the ladies' room and had a conversation with myself.
Oh, my. What did you say?
Well, first of all, I thought about Ron. He had told me that I could turn words into dollars. Here's an opportunity being laid before me. And guess what? It was for what was then a brand new newspaper called USA Today.
Oh, my goodness.
This was in 1986.
Wow.
So I get it together. I get in there and I whip myself into shape. And you go right back out there and you tell her, yes, you'll do that. And I did. And she said, Pamela, this will be really good for you. So I took my little used car. I got another little beat around car, and I drove it from Jacksonville to a place called St. Mary's, Georgia, where President Reagan had just signed off on the budget for the Trident submarine program. That was another one of my hesitancies. I'm like, I don't know anything about submarines. All they wanted me to do was to talk to some of the people who lived in the area about the effect that was going to have. So once I calmed myself down, which is another reason not to let fear and tension and stuff just make me blow an opportunity of a lifetime. I'm thinking, there's a real estate office. I'll go in there. Who could tell us better what the impact would be on that program coming to this tiny town? I'm trying to close out some of this light. And I get in there, and he is the most cordial gentleman, offers me an ice cold Coca-Cola and everything. And I felt bad for ever thinking I'd have been treated any other way. He was so nice to me. So he gave me his input. I walked up and down the sidewalk and ended into a convenience store and talked with some people there. And the gentleman at the real estate office had told me that, listen, when you're done, you could come back here if you like and what do they call it? Transcribe my story. That's what we had back in those days. We didn't have laptops and phones and all of that yet, right? I had old Radio Shack TRS-80 that I had for a while, but I had to do all that in my own, what I had created, my own shorthand. And actually got on the phone, dialed that number back to USA Today and gave them the story. And lo and behold, unlike all the other mornings when I'm on my way into Ron's classroom and entering the building, I did not walk past that newspaper machine. This time, I took 2 of my little precious quarters that I'm saving from food stamps and put them in there, pull it out, and I get that paper, Dr. Heath, and I'm literally tearing it apart. Where's my name? Where's my name? And there it was. And then I'm in shock because I'm like, oh my God, what if the welfare workers see my name in the paper? But then I realized they'll probably just say, nah, that can't be her. She's just another welfare mom.
That's right.
So once I'd been published in a national newspaper, the rest was easy for me because the locals were like, well, if you were good enough for USA Today, then yes, they took my story, and I eventually became a daily writer for the business section of the Florida Times-Union, which is the daily newspaper in Jacksonville.
That is amazing, and I want to point out to our listeners something that happened there that I'm sure that Pamela knows herself. But as important as it was for others to look at her and say, since you've published in a national newspaper, we know that you're capable of doing something else. More important than that is what she told herself about herself. See, once she did it, that provided some evidence to her of what she was capable of. And going back to the fear just real quick.
That's right. They call it clips. And I had my first clip.
Oh, I see. Your first clip was a great evidence of all that you're capable of. And go back to the fear. We have a little thing in the Art Lab, which stands for Accurate, Realistic Thinking, Life-Affirming Beliefs, is that it's not fear that's the problem. Now, that's a common misperception because it's the first thing you notice. But it's important to realize where fear comes from. Fear comes from beliefs. If you want to change your emotions, change your beliefs. What creates fear is, well, Pamela shared that. She was saying, she was fortune telling, here's how it's going to be when I go do the interview. Since I don't know anything about trident submarines, I will fail. People will view me as somebody that they don't want to talk to. It's going to turn out to be a catastrophe. Well, see, all of that will create fear. All of that will create anxiety. And so we encourage people to stop focusing on the emotion. Let the emotion be. Focus on your thought process, because we first engineer our thoughts, and our thoughts then engineer our lives. If you want a more successful life, engineer more successful thoughts. What a story that is. And tell us a little bit about what's in your book. I know we've talked a lot about it. A Day at the Fair, One Woman's Welfare Passage. And what are some key takeaways that our listeners might expect if they grab and read that book?
That, again, what I was saying earlier about the importance of being willing to step out of your known. After all, in that instance, I could pretty much see what my options were. Do I want to continue living at that level? Or can I start working on what is a vision and bring it into materialization? Which I always say, how it happens is not up to us. What's really up to us is to discipline ourselves, to look for the little signs along the way and take the opportunities when they come. And so that would be one of them, is being willing to expose yourself. Just think, if I was not willing to put myself in the college environment, because I was not willing to expose myself to things that I might not have been comfortable with, being that I was living as badly and as lowly as I was, then I would never have had that opportunity occur for me. And I couldn't make it happen, but I had to be in place. So when we're really trying to achieve a goal, sometimes we might think it's really important how it has to happen. But if we do that, we're limiting our thinking. All we have to do is discipline ourselves and follow the path of what is correct. And lo and behold, it'll be presented your way.
Oh, I completely agree so much. And I love what you say about the unknown. The human brain tends to think of the unknown, which is really lack of knowledge, as a threat to us, and the unknown is not necessarily a threat to us. And that's what you were able to get over there. It's been such a wonderful discussion. Just to wrap up, we've talked about the mechanics of poverty, common myths about welfare, coping with major life change. And I'd like to kind of wrap up the episode with a couple of things. And one is, if you could pick your top self-improvement hack, your top self-improvement method or technique, what would be that top self-improvement thing you might recommend to listeners?
T-ballers, time to quit your lollygagging. Get out of the dugout, onto the field, and live the art life.
To take time to read more, because I'm needing to do that right now. I'm like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm juggling that, but I need to take time to read more. So that is just, that's how I became a writer. Again, I had no formal skills in writing before I got to community college. But what I did have was I was hot on books. And that began because when I was little, my dad used to read the Sunday paper. He would sit in his Naugahyde chair. I think it was orange recliner. And
orange Naugahyde.
I noticed, and when I was like maybe 6 years old, I noticed that, wow, there's a piece of the paper. It's all in color. And I discovered that as a comic section. So now Daddy's Sunday afternoon ritual of reading the paper became something that he and I shared, because I would spread that paper out and get on my knees, and I'm trying to read the words, and Daddy would help me, because when I saw the pictures the first time, I was crying because I couldn't understand what the big bear was saying to the little bear. Of course, that was Yogi and Boo Boo, right?
I love Yogi and Boo Boo.
I go to my dad crying because I want to know what they're saying. And so he started reading to me. And that is how I got turned on to the whole power of words thing. And from that point on, I would go to the library as a child and check out whatever the maximum allowance of books were. My favorites were books like Snip, Snap, and Snurr, and Robert Louis Stevenson's Child's Garden of Verses, and all of that. And I would eat these books, And so I'm back at that stage, and now I need to be feeding that a little more. I know what I know, but I need to learn more. I need to expand. And the answer to that is right behind me.
Vitamin B, the best nutrition for the brain, vitamin B, books. And we have one more thing to go here, and then we'll let Pamela get about her busy schedule. I've not notified Pamela this. This is off the cuff, but we always surprise our guests at the end.
We journey now with DocHeath as he submerges with our special guest into the depths beneath the dark recesses of the therapy couch.
I'm going to put it on the overhead cam for those of you listening, because I'm going to go under the deep, dark depths of the psychotherapy couch and pull out a question that we've curated for Pam. And you can take your time and think about this. I don't think it'll be tough, because
drum roll, please.
We try drum roll, please. Do I have a drum roll here? Maybe there's a. I have an air horn though. Okay, this shouldn't be that difficult for a reader. Pamela, share with us and our listeners your favorite quote.
My favorite quote is one that I wish I knew who wrote it, but everywhere I've looked it up, I can find it, and it always says unknown or anonymous or whatever. And that is, on the day of victory, no pain is felt.
Oh, I've heard that. I love that quote. On the day of victory, no pain is felt. That is amazing. Pam, you have such a wonderful presentation, and I think that book would be awesome to read. I'm going to grab a copy myself. You listeners can go to PamelaCovington.com/books and grab a copy of Pamela's inspirational memoir, A Day at the Fair, One Woman's Welfare Passage, and you can learn how she overcame adversity. You can follow Pamela on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, or you're welcome to connect with her via email, Pamela@PamelaMCovington.com. There's an M in the middle. Pamela.
That's right.
At Pamela M. Covington. And make sure I got the website right. It is www.PamelaMCovington.com/books. Anything you'd like to leave our listeners with, Pamela, about how to get in touch with you and check out more of what you do?
No, but if they're interested, I'll have there's a sign-in on my website, and they can go in and get notified of what I'm doing next. And now that I'm embarking upon the thing of taking all my lived experiences to help women live happier, more fulfilling lives. If women find themselves interested in partnering with me, I hope they'll go to my website and sign up, and we've got it from there. Let's get acquainted.
That's amazing. And Pamela has turned her life into a message, and all you listeners, you can do the same. Go out there. Don't waste your hurts. Don't waste your hurdles. Turn your life into a message that helps others. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here, Pam. And we look forward to all your work in the future. And God bless everything you do. Thank you, T-Ballers. Join us on the next episode. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Welcome to On the Couch and Off Our Rocker with Dr. Ima Freudnot, where we review our special guest Therapy Bites Art Lab episode, Psycho-Malarky Scale Assessment Results. That's PMS for short.
Resilience Warrior, Ms. Pamela M. Covington's PMS performance places her in the 97th percentile on the PMS's VFS, victory at the FAIR scale. This presents a predilection for a prevailing degree of perspicaciousness in Ms. Pamela M. Covington's cortical crevices and a sagacious susceptibility towards superlative success. Overall, Ms. Pamela M. Covington's PMS psychosylmetric assessment results present a picture of an individual incalculably incomparable in her awe-inspiring amplitude for altitudinous achievement, and who superlatively spreads her auspicious story-salting minds towards seeking their own soaring successes. This surpassing soul likely has a promising prognosis of fervid success in the near future until the fantastically fierce features of her psyche have been psychomalogically analyzed and exercised. It is my considered conclusion that Ms. Pamela M. Covington be prescribed no less than a 223 milligram IA intra-advocacy dose of Helpamol and a 2300 milligram IS intracellular dose of PRN Achieveril to curb any constricting cognitions. Dr. Ima Freudnot, Chief Shrinkstigator, Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Grab some of this episode's guest merchandise, specially designed to help keep this episode's message top of mind in your life. Don't forget friends and family members who could use an Art Lab mental boost too. Just go to therapybites.myshopify.com.
Hey, T-Ballers. Thanks so much for being with us today. If we brought value to your day, show us some love by leaving your positive feedback and inviting some friends to listen in and join the TBAL Team. Next time on Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Hey, T-Ballers, welcome back to another episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab. And for those listeners that are new, Art Lab stands for Accurate, Realistic Thinking and Life-Affirming Beliefs. And do we have a treat for you today? Jim Fuller on an episode called Meant to Be, the Psychology of Radical Self-Acceptance. And Jim is a conscious communication coach, and I know you're going to love him just the way we do. We've been so looking forward to him getting on the show today as we're going to discuss the mechanics of becoming yourself, the mechanics of connecting to others, secrets of self-reliance and resilience, and some of Jim's tips on overcoming hurdles next on Therapy Bites Art Lab.
Government legal gobbledygook. Therapy Bites is not intended as a diagnostic or as an alternative to professional clinical treatment. Resources and advice are for information and entertainment purposes only. Brought to you by someone saying things you don't like? Tape that nagging loudmouth shut. Government-approved speech tape. Gas tape. Now available at your local hardware store. Therapy Bites Art Lab is not an approved, endorsed, authorized, butt-kissing affiliate of the United States Special Offense Assessment Police. SOAP for short. Warning. Consumption of Therapy Bites Art Lab content by Kool-Aid drinking, stinking thinking, social media, pseudo-psychological pushing, wacky woke anti-free speech, mumbo-jumbo advocates may cause spontaneous internal skull combustion, stomach discomfort, and or laxative effects. Allergy warning. Therapy Bites is manufactured in a facility that challenges nutty distortions, processes nuggets of accurate, realistic thinking, and life-affirming beliefs. This is the audio version of the legal fine print. Why are you still listening to this when you can catch the next great episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab with a good friend or family member? Really? Are you still there? This is getting silly. Move on to the next psychologically thrilling episode of the best advice on the net. No copay required.
Me eat copay.
Yeah, with Dr. Heath and the TBAL team. Go ahead, don't be podgoraphobic. Scoot, scoot, scoot. On to the next episode.